Hi, and welcome to Cape Cod Book Scene, a half-hour show about the literary life of Cape Cod. I'm your host, Melanie Lowrance, books editor at the Cape Cod Times and creator of Cape Cod Book Scene in both its print versions and here on the television. My guest this morning has written and published what I consider a groundbreaking book about someone who has a deep root on Cape Cod and in literature, and amazingly has never had a biography written before. And the book is Nature's Ambassador, The Legacy of Thornton W. Burgess, and the author is Christie Palmer Lowrance. And good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Melanie.
As soon as I always say this, but as soon as I opened this book, I went, oh, my favorite characters, the beautiful art, the precious stories. How did you come to this?
Well, it was waiting. It was waiting to be done, for one thing. I have been a freelance writer for about 35 years, and you're always looking, as you well know, for something to pick up on. And Nancy Titcomb had mentioned, this was in 2009, that Thornton Burgess's, the anniversary of Old Mother West Wind, his first book was the next year. So I thought, aha, here's opportunity. And what began as a basic idea, a good idea to follow up on, became a book proposal and expanded out of that into a full-blown biography.
And this had not been done before?
No, there's Burgess's granddaughter, Frances Meigs, wrote a memoir, beautiful memoir. My grandfather, Thornton Burgess, and Russell Lovell, town historian, some years ago, wrote a book covering the genealogy and Thornton Burgess's days in Sandwich. There's also a bibliography by Wayne Wright that chronicles all his books, but in terms of a biography that covers his childhood, his work, his literary work, and particularly lays out his work as a naturalist. I think that's the sleeper element in this. I think it's going to be of great interest to people to realize how involved he was in early 20th century conservation.
His name is not prominent in that area. No,
and when I began interviewing people, I got a book contract with Schiffer, and even before that, you have to put a proposal together. You have to amass quite a background of information. So I was talking with naturalists and people in more scientific fields, and the name wasn't resonating. Oh, it was sort of vague. Yes, I think I've heard of him. And I thought, oh my, I could be in trouble here. So it was, it required really going down, but just below the surface of this story, you just, blew the top inch away, and there was this gorgeous story waiting.
Well, let's talk a little bit about his connection to Sandwich for our viewers. Just exactly what is it?
Well, he was born in Sandwich in 1874, in my house, to be exact. And yes, kind of interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yes, and the pieces of information about Thornton Burgess, he's certainly well known in Sandwich, and that he lived in 10 houses, yes. That he wrote 15,000 syndicated stories, yes. People know these things.
That's a lot of writing.
You see, and that's it. Your reaction is when you stop and think about these things, you understand it differently. Yeah. And putting together a biography is different. You have to occupy that person's space a little bit more. Now, I'm not a fiction writer, so I don't do what those fiction writers that you've interviewed here do. But Thornton Burgess was born in my house, went to school in an elementary school across the street. But in Sandwich, if you know the village at all, there's here's Main Street at the end of School Street. There's a street here and a street here, Liberty and Jarvis, and he lived in 5 houses along there because his father had died when he was 10 months old. This was 1874. So his mother had no means except the generosity and kindness of family, accommodating them, putting them up. But I'd been working on this for a while before I thought, what would that really be like? This was a child who had never had his own room, his own space. This was mine. And I think I began to have a feeling that Thornton Burgess's superb sense of the ecological environment. Many people have commented on his ability to develop not just the character, but the entire ecosystem, the environment, the creatures in it. And I think he had to be this awareness, this sense of observation that characterized him as a naturalist. I think this was fostered, in those very early days when, yes, he had to be conscious of what was going on around him because he didn't have his own space. But his time in Sandwich, that's only a piece of it. He writes in his autobiography about the time that he spent in the woods, and you just sense that his time there was a sense of freedom about it, of pleasure, the company of the animals in the woods. And he writes about, nostalgically, affectionately, about picking cranberries and blueberries and mayflowers, all ways that children and adults back in the 1800s could earn money, which was the purpose, to just add a little bit to his mother's ability to support them. So the Sandwich piece is really fun. The Sandwich Archives, Barbara Gill there is just, what a resource she is. And the Thornton Burgess Society photographs.
The book is full of photographs, wonderful photographs.
Yeah.
Going all the way back. I mean, as far as you could go, really, in his childhood.
Right.
Other family members, outings.
Right.
Snapshots, what we would consider snapshots now, and portraits.
Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed those. There's one photograph of Jarvis Street, looking down Jarvis Street, and there's a horse and buggy and a car together.
Yes, yeah.
And Sandwich, in many ways, has that same quality, that same very lovely, picturesque, antique feel about it. And so Thornton Burgess, the village that he knew is very much the village of today that's there. And so to look at these houses and just imagine, this is where he lived as a boy. And this is where his friends lived. My house backs up to the house of Jonathan Leonard. And his house has been in his family since the 1700s. And his father was a classmate and a very good friend of Thornton Burgess's. So Thornton Burgess didn't live in that house for a long time.
Yeah.
After his father died, he and his mother began moving into, staying with relatives.
And how long did that period last? What was the next sort of major period of his life?
Well, he left Sandwich when he was about 18, and I think about this too. There's such inspiration in this story, in this man. He left with a high school education. He left with his diploma, and he would have loved to have gone to college. That was absolutely financially out of the question. And he hated math. He wasn't really suited for business. Where was he going to fit in here? And he felt really no place. So he went to Boston. The only educational opportunity he had, his grandfather said he would pay for a year of bookkeeping courses. And he hated it.
Oh, I bet.
I mean, it was just agony for him. But that's all he had. So he took advantage of it. And his first jobs in Boston were bookkeeping. And he was just miserable. But there was a period when he was in Boston and Cambridge working, young man, early 20s, who am I, where am I going, what am I doing, you know. And a pivotal moment in his life when he took one of those great risks that many people take when you just jumping off the cliff. You don't know what's going to happen, you just believe that this is going to work for you. And his mother, who was in Springfield at that time, living with her sister, had emailed him that there was a vacancy with a publisher in Springfield, Phelps Publishing, and the editor-in-chief was a neighbor of his mother, and so she emailed him and listen to that. Oh my gosh,
I didn't even pick up on it.
So funny. It's so funny.
That's sad.
Yeah, let's see.
I know better. It's okay. I know better.
Oh, was that funny? Oh gosh, that is
She wrote him a letter in longhand.
Yes, yeah.
And mailed
I think it was a telegram.
Oh, okay.
Because this was really urgent, and she said, "There's an opportunity here at this publisher. This is what you've wanted, and follow up on it." And she really urged him. This wasn't just a good suggestion. This was, this is something you need to do. And he was in agony over this. He at least was making a little money. The job that she was proposing was as an office boy, maybe suitable for a 15 or 16-year-old. He was in his early 20s. Cut in pay, leaving his friends and family in the Boston area. And for what? He was going to be sweeping floors, dusting off writers' and editors' desks, and sharpening pencils. It was really lowly work.
And that was the opening he needed.
But he this leap of faith is jumping off the cliff. It would place him. It would place him where he wanted to be. The opportunity itself didn't give him what he wanted, but it placed him in a publishing company, in an arena that he thought was something he wanted.
At this point, was he thinking about writing and illustrating, or was he thinking about other people's work?
He had found when he was in Boston, he was unhappy there, and he was writing poems, and he had gotten a few pieces placed, and he realized how much he enjoyed that, and that there was money to be made in that. So that became a dream of his. It didn't really. He didn't have any big plan on how to achieve it, and his work with Phelps, he made such a gutsy decision, and it absolutely paid off, because there he was among these editors and writers, and he would say, well, such and such is taking place, and he began giving them tips, and then he began going along as a photographer, and then he began writing his own material, and then he had his own desk. And eventually he was an associate editor for Good Housekeeping, which Phelps Publishing had purchased. So in terms of his vision for his career, I think it was mostly earning money. That was a driving force with him, and just, establishing himself as a journalist. And he was a journalist for 16 years before Old Mother West Wind came out.
And was that an instant success?
You couldn't call it a great success. It was a modest success. I think he sold 2,000 copies the first year and made a few $100s from it. But it was enough so that the next year, when he had quite a crisis in his life, he was laid off. I mean, they're contemporary pieces. If you read his story, his personal story, he was raised by a single parent, and being laid off from his job at Good Housekeeping, he found a note on his desk on a Monday morning, your services aren't needed, and he'd worked there for 16 years.
Sounds very contemporary.
It was devastating. It was devastating, and more so because he had remarried. It's another piece, you know, but he had remarried, so he was supporting himself. At that point, he had a son, a young son, his mother, his new wife, and her 2 teenagers. And 2 months later, he has no job. So the earlier, it wasn't a lark exactly, but as a writer, you know, he was always looking for ways to find work. So the publication by Little Brown of Old Mother West Wind just came about as a serendipitous event, and this is kind of fun and exciting, and you know, he was really happy about it, but he wasn't looking on, this wasn't the start of his a literary career, absolutely not.
But in fact it was.
In fact it was.
Yeah, an amazing literary career with indelible characters that generations of children and adults have come to love. That's the thing that amazes me when you look at, you know, who these characters are, and the beautiful illustrations. These are original illustrations in the book
by Harrison Cady.
By Harrison Cady, they're absolutely stunning, but they're also, there's other. I'm looking for one of with Peter.
Yes.
Yes. Who, this is how I learned to read, was with these books. That was better than a half a century ago.
Wow.
And so, you know, the lasting value of these characters too. It's almost as if they're reinvented each time a new generation comes along.
Right. There was the change to the more realistic, and one of those 2 pages show illustrations. That section does demonstrate that there were a variety of illustrators, and as you point out, completely different styles.
Oh yeah, very, very different styles.
But what people don't realize is that Louis Agassiz Fuertes, who was a absolutely brilliant ornithological painter, illustrated 5 Thornton Burgess books. And for the biography, I interviewed Robert Peck, who was the biographer for Louis Agassiz Fuertes.
Yeah, I think I saw some of those, right? I know I saw them, but anyway, they're absolutely beautiful, but they're very different. They're more Audubon-like.
That's it.
These here, yes.
Yeah.
Are more Audubon-like illustrations. So totally different, no cartoonish quality to them at all.
Those were illustrations from the Burgess Bird Book for Children. Still available. You can buy it online, you can buy it in stores, you can read reviews online of that book, 1919, with parents saying, "Oh, my children love this."
Oh,
and
I bet.
Yeah, so that's an astonishing piece of Thornton Burgess, is the fact that his work has found an audience in our century.
Yes, you're right, right. That's a long time. That's a long time. So let's talk about sort of the re-embrace of Sandwich. Was that his re-embrace of Sandwich? Did that remain home? Or,
yes.
Okay, so that always remained home to him.
One thing particularly points that out. He left when he was 18. He went to Boston. He moved to Springfield, and he stayed. He lived in Springfield and then Hamden, in Western Massachusetts. And one interview asked him one time, "What's a Cape Cod boy like you doing out here?" And he said that he liked the hills. So there was that countryside out there. That was his home, but Cape Cod was where his deepest roots were. And the incident that most says how strong that was his he buried 2 wives. His second wife, Fanny, died in 1950, and he was a man of deep feelings, and the grieving that he went through was so evident in letters and journals. And at the so he recorded in his journal that after his second wife Fanny died, he came to Cape Cod. They stayed at the Coonamessett Inn in Falmouth and came back to Sandwich, drove up Grove Street, drove around Sham Pond, went to the cemetery where his ancestors, Thomas Burgess, was buried, and visited with old friends. So this was his heart, was always here on the Cape and in Sandwich.
And did he didn't die here on the Cape, did he?
No, he died in Springfield.
In Springfield. So
yeah.
That remained sort of also a home base.
It did. Yes, it did. But his family, he was very proud of the fact that he was from one of the original ancestors, from Sandwich, Thomas Burgess. And again, writing a biography and piecing these things together, things come alive for you. When you're driving past the town hall along Old Main Street, and you come to 6A eventually, but just past the town hall, there's a lovely old cemetery on the right-hand side, and there you'll see fairly prominently is a headstone that says Burgess, and that's where Burgess family members are buried, including his father. So when I was doing the research for this, Barbara Gill helped me locate an obituary of his father, who had died in, let's see, Virginia, I think. He had tuberculosis. Oh. But the description in the obituary of the mourners coming to the cemetery, and just the many people and how beloved he was in Sandwich. As Thornton Burgess's father, of the same name, died at 24, but in that time he had made really good friends. But so that cemetery was for Thornton Burgess. That was a home place in a way.
How long did it take you altogether to put the book together?
4.5 years. Oh. Yeah, long time. It wasn't expected to be that long. Yeah. Pete Schiffer, the owner of Schiffer Publishing, it's a family. Yeah.
They're based in Pennsylvania.
They're based in Ackland, Pennsylvania. Yeah. But it's a family operation, and there is that sense of other priorities than business. So
they like Cape Cod authors.
They definitely do.
They like Cape Cod authors, and my sense is that they do very well by them.
They do.
The books are beautiful.
Right.
Absolutely beautiful.
I had one friend of mine who's very knowledgeable in the book field, and she held the book up like this, and she said, "Wow, they did right by you."
Yeah.
They do. Schiffer's known for the beautiful work they do, and you pointed out those illustrations. So, and the fact that it's got a dust jacket, and that. I mean, these are little things that...
and the color reproduction. The color reproduction is gorgeous.
Right.
I think with this book, it's a pleasure to look at as well as to read. And I think that's, for me, that's always the mark of a good biography, is I want to see the person's work well done too. And then there's just these great photos of him of all types.
Look at this one.
I know, Burgess in the forest. And that's the beginning of the part on his role as a naturalist.
Yes.
So how are you finding the book being received? I mean, are people surprised or?
Well, in your studio here.
Yeah.
Patty is helping, and her mom said that she's familiar with this.
Yeah.
So it's that the familiarity with Burgess is very strong. You run into people. I was at a book signing the other day, and young woman came past and she said, "I majored in children's lit. I've never heard of him," you know. And
oh my goodness.
well,
how is that possible?
That's the point. That's the point of the book.
Yeah.
Really is, and it took a while to gain the sense of authority to say this individual has been overlooked in natural science, and in the annals of natural science, and in children's literature.
Yeah. He's a real American character, I think.
He absolutely is.
Yeah,
he absolutely is. Well said.
I think that's a real American story, and it plugs into so many aspects of what the late 19th century and full 20th century were all about, all summed up in one person, including the fact that, you know, the children had literature directed at themselves now, directed at what their interests were and the things that made them excited about reading, and also brought in this natural world that was probably, during his lifetime, rapidly disappearing from when he was a boy. So,
shockingly so. The natural science section of the book, part 3, has there are 3 chapters in that. One covers William Hornaday, who was the New York Zoological Society director. One is Austin Clark, who was a Smithsonian curator, and the other chapter involves Alfred Gross from Bowdoin College. And I have just great letters documenting the relationship that Burgess had with these prominent scientists. And this, as I said, the natural science story, his engagement, his absolute passion, his driving passion for nature, and using these children's stories to bring it to children. It resonates, don't you think?
That's his abiding gift.
Yeah.
It really is. I hate to say this, but we're out of time.
How can that be?
I know.
You were right.
I know. I could just go on about this forever, but I want to thank you, Christie Palmer Lowrance, and for writing the book, first of all, and for being here today. And the book is Nature's Ambassador, The Legacy of Thornton W. Burgess. If you only know the name from having spotted it here and there on Cape Cod, do yourself a favor and get to know who this person is. This is a true American original and a true Cape Cod original, and definitely worth knowing more. And thank you for being here this morning.
Oh, my pleasure.
And,
thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us this morning, and I'll see you again on the next Cape Cod Book Scene.